All right, hello everyone, welcome back. Now we're moving on to Module 1.2, Public Speaking Fundamentals. So congratulations, you made it to the first module, which was Module 1.1, which was on what exactly was public speaking in very generic terms. So now we're gonna move into a couple more specifics. Hopefully you watched the introduction video that I provided, that was Module 1.2a. That video wasn't created by me, of course, it was just open source educational material on YouTube. But there gives a pretty good and pretty general explanation of some skills that are really important to becoming a very good public speaker. So let's move into what exactly those skills are in a more detailed way. So our first one is going to be about appearance and presentation. Okay, so what exactly is appearance and presentation? So let's get into our first bullet point. So appearance presentation is very self-explanatory. It's how you show up physically to your speech. Usually, you do not want your clothing to distract your audience. So if you see what I'm wearing right now, very formal appearance. My clothing definitely doesn't distract from my face or what I'm saying. That's usually the most appropriate way to appear to a public speaking or speech event. The best thing to remember when thinking about appearance and presentation is think about a political candidate, that's giving a speech or debating with another political candidate. They don't go up to those speeches in colored dresses or clothing that is overly expressive. They show up to speeches in suits usually because they do not want their clothing to distract from what they're saying. So I'm just gonna write here a quick bullet point. Hopefully you have your notes out and you're taking these notes. But the first one is gonna be, don't wear overly expressive or distracting clothing. Right, and as a general rule, you want to wear something formal, like what I'm wearing right now, right? I'm wearing a shirt and a tie. So generally, formal clothing. All right, so hopefully you can see that, right? So just to go over, don't wear overly expressive or distracting clothing, and generally you want to wear formal clothing. So clothing that, again, doesn't distract your audience, and clothing that allows your audience to focus on your speech and what you're saying rather than what you're wearing. Okay, get my eraser really quick. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 is going to be your entry and your exit. So I'm just going to write really quickly here. Entry / exit. So once again, this is very self-explanatory. This is the way you enter the stage, whether you're debating, whether you're giving a speech, whatever it is. The way you address your audience, so the way you address your audience prior to giving your speech gives away a lot, right? So you want to enter the stage looking confident, right? You don't want to be slouching like this. You don't want to be looking down at the floor, acting like you don't really care, or you're acting like you're lazy or tired. You want to be head up, chin up, right? Shoulders back, ready to give your speech. You want to look as if you're big, kind of, in a sense. You want to look like you're very confident in what you're saying, and you want to look like you believe in what you're saying. So I'm just going to write very simply here, showing confidence, right? You want to show confidence with your body, basically. And the next thing is, so show confidence with your body. And the next thing is that entering and exiting with your head up, shoulders back, and chin up. Right, appear, appear, right, you want to appear big. And I put 3 exclamation marks there. I'm going to underline it as well. It's really important. You want to appear big. You want to appear kind of dominating in a sense, not in a negative way, in definitely a positive way. You want to appear confident is what I'm really trying to get at here, right? Okay, so hopefully you guys have got this down. I'm going to move on to number 3 now. All right, these next 2 ones are probably the most important ones out of all of them. The first one out of the 2 is going to be body language. So a lot of studies that are out there have actually shown that the way you express yourself with your body, physically, right? You don't even have to speak. Just the way you express yourself with your body gives away about 80 to 90% of what you're feeling at that moment, right? So usually things like slouching, looking down at the ground, right? Like red eyes, things like that, show that you're very tired, sad, depressed, right? Things like that. Other more positive things, right? You're looking up, straight ahead of you. You're not looking down. Your shoulders are back. Your back is straight. Things like that. Those are associated with confidence and positivity, you know, having an optimistic outlook. Things like that. So you really want to focus on the positive side of body language, right? You want to have your shoulders back, your head up, your chin up, right? Your back very straight. So those things are very important when giving a speech, probably the most important things, right? So I'm just going to write a quick note here. Very important. Gives away 80 to 90% of what you are feeling. Right, so very important, gives away 80 to 90% of what you are feeling. Once again, just like I said in the confidence entry and exit one, I'm going to say it again. Head up. Shoulders back. And your spine is straight. Your spine is straight. So again, look at those once again, go over those. Very important. So from here on out, when you're practicing in front of a mirror or you're practicing in front of your parents, I want you to really focus on those things. These are really important, very important. Body language, as I said, gives away so much of what you're feeling without you even having to speak. One more thing about body language that I wanted to add actually is fidgeting. So usually when people are speaking in a formal sense or in front of a big public audience, they tend to fidget, meaning they'll move around their hands, they'll play with their pockets, they'll play with objects, various objects that they have on them or around them, and you don't want to do that. You can use gestures, like 1, 2, 3, things like that. You can move around your hands. I move around my hands a lot. I'm a very animated person, and that's completely up to you. Or you could be completely still. But one thing you really want to make a conscious effort about is really pay attention to where your hands are going, what you're doing with your legs, what you're doing with your feet, because all of that can really give away a lot of stuff to the audience. For example, you being nervous or you being anxious about giving the speech, and you don't want to show your audience that you're feeling nervous or anxious. So I'm just gonna write here. Really important again is fidgeting. Right? So fidgeting is something you really want to focus on as well for body language. These are the main notes for that. So let's move on to number 4. Okay, so number 4, which is equally as important as body language actually. Number 4 is volume. So number 4, which is volume, is exactly what it says, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious. When you think about volume, what do you think about? You think about like turning your car radio up, or turning the radio that you're listening to up, or turning the TV sound up, right? It's the same thing with your voice. You can change your voice, you can make it go up and down, but you want to make sure you're projecting your voice. So I'm gonna write that. Project your voice. So, and as I was saying, there's different levels of projection, right? So there's different levels of projection. And the level of projection that you're going to be at, right, how loud you're going to make your voice be, is going to be determined by how large your audience is. So obviously if you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone, you're not going to be yelling, right? Or you're not going to be talking very loudly because the person's right in front of you and you don't want them to perceive or think that you're yelling. But if you have a really big audience, and let's say the furthest person from you is something like 100 meters away from you, then you really need to make sure you're talking loudly. You really need to make sure that your voice is loud enough so that the person way in the back, that person that's 100 meters away from you, can hear what you're saying. Again, you want to make sure you're not yelling, but at the same time, you want to make sure you're not whispering or too quiet for people to hear you. So I'll just write really quickly here that level of projection. So level of projection by how far. So the level of projection is determined by how far the furthest away audience member is from you. Okay, again, so level of projection is determined by how far the furthest away audience member is from you. And I'm gonna really quickly write not yelling or whispering but just right? You want to be just in between yelling and whispering, basically perfect, right? You want to have that really nice level of projection. So just right. Okay. So again, really quickly reviewing these things, projecting your voice so that you're not yelling or whispering, you're just at that right point where the furthest away audience member can hear you clearly, but you don't sound too aggressive and you don't sound too soft. Okay, so the fifth one, which actually goes directly with volume, is tone. So a lot of my students have a difficult time understanding when to use the right tone. tone is basically voice modulation or volume modulation, meaning how you change your volume or how you change how loud you are, right? So it's volume modulation. Modulation is just basically how you change your volume. Right? So yeah, so it's volume modulation, how you change your volume. But this is a very subjective thing, meaning it's different for different people, right? Because it really depends on the speech you're giving. And that's the most difficult thing about tone, is that really to master tone, I guess you could say, I don't really know if you could really master tone, but anyway, to get good at using the right tone, you need to practice. And you need to know you need to know the kind of speech you're giving. So you need to know the right time to use the right tone. So I'm gonna write here, practice. Again, this practice is really important for all of them, for knowing all of the skills. But this one specifically, tone, practice is really, really important for it. So I'm just gonna write it really quickly here. Depends on the type of speech and its content. Right, so it depends on the type of speech and its content. Right, one last bullet point. So before we go into the last bullet point, really quickly, volume modulation, that's what tone is. And then to really master and get good at tone, you want to practice, because it depends on the type of speech and what content the speech contains, right? Okay, so finally, what exactly is tone used for? Really, you want to use tone to put emphasis ideas and points that you are making. Make this clear. Okay. Right. So tone, really what it's used for is to put emphasis on certain ideas and points that you're making. I'll put a little star here because this is the main reason that tone exists, basically. That volume modulation exists. Because when you're trying to make an important point, maybe you want to raise your voice, right? Like I did there. You want to raise your voice when you're making an important point so that it sticks with the audience and it catches the audience's attention. And then maybe there's a point that's really subtle that you want to make. Then you're going to really quiet your voice, right? You're going to lower your voice so that your audience catches that change and really pays attention to it. That's the whole point of tone, to engage your audience. In fact, I'm going to write it here. I'll write it right here. Engage your audience. Right? Engage your audience. Okay? So hopefully you got all of these notes down. So number six is eye contact. So I'm gonna write that right here. So eye contact is really important. In fact, there were probably multiple times during this lecture that I might have looked to the left of the camera or to the right of the camera. Usually when you're addressing your audience, you want to focus and look into their eyes. So in this case, obviously, you guys are not here, so I'm looking into the camera of my phone. But usually when you're giving a speech in person, which is what it's gonna be like most of the time, you wanna be looking straight into your audience's eyes. And one of the points that, the video came prior to this lecture, one of the points that he made was really important actually. He said, 1 point, 1 look. Right, so for each point that you're making, maybe focus on a specific audience member in the entire audience. And then when you're making a different point, focus on another audience member in the entire audience. That helps a lot because it shows the audience that you really want to connect with them on a personal level. You believe in what you're saying, and so it shows the audience that you really want to show them that what you're saying is right. And so it tends to work as a persuasion and convincing tactic, right? So I'm gonna write it here. Shows your audience that you believe in what you are saying and want to connect with them. Right? Shows your audience that you believe in what you're saying and therefore want to connect with them. Really important, eye contact, because you're looking into their eyes. Right. So that's about it for eye contact. Hopefully you guys got those notes down. The seventh one is going to be notes. So notes are usually a very important part of any speech, right? Unless you have your speech memorized. Again, that's another case. Usually having your speech memorized really helps because that means that it shows the audience that you're prepared. It shows your audience that you were committed to giving the speech, which is exactly why you memorized it. But there's some speeches that are just simply too long and you can't memorize them. So you have notes on hand. A really big mistake that beginner public speakers make is their notes, they just read off of them. They're not actual notes, right? They just look down at their paper the entire time and they read off of them. So I'm just gonna write that really nicely right here. Is biggest mistake people read directly off of their notes. Right, so that's the biggest mistake, that people read directly off of their notes. But in reality, that's not what speech notes are at all. I mean, that's like just typing out your entire speech and reading off of it, but that's not what notes are, right? Notes are just supposed to be a quick reference, a quick tool that you can look at in order to recall certain ideas that you want to address during your speech. So I'm just gonna write that here. Notes are supposed to be in quotes, a quick tool / reference to look at so that you can, sorry about that, so that you can recall what you want to say. Right? So notes are supposed to be a quick tool and reference to look at so that you can recall what you want to say. Usually the best way you want to use your notes is look down briefly, read your note, then look up and address the audience. So look down briefly, read your note, then look up and address the audience, right? So if I was to quantify, the ratios or the exact percentage of the speech that you should allocate to looking down at your paper and reading your notes, I'd probably say it's no more than 15 to 20%. 15 to 20% reading notes 80% is allocated to looking at the audience to speak. Right. So 15-20% are reading your notes, and then 80% is allocated to looking at the audience to speak. That's really how you want to divide it up for notes. So hopefully you have these, speaking of notes, hopefully you have these notes down. Okay, let's move on to our final one. This one is more about speech structure than anything else, meaning the way you organize your speech. In fact, this one is called organization. Right, this is something that we're going to get more into in our later modules. This is a little bit more of an advanced topic, so we're gonna get more into it in later modules. So I'm just gonna give you a quick sneak peek into what exactly organization is. So as I was saying, it's basically speech structure, right? So I see a lot of people that ramble, they're all over the place when they're giving a speech on whatever topic, it could literally be any topic. And they're rambling, they're all over the place. So you really want to be concise and clear during your speech. You want to have a clear, as he was saying in the video, right? You want to have a clear introduction, right? And we're going to get into exactly, we're going to get more in depth into exactly what the introduction and then the body and the conclusion are later. But I'm just going to give you the brief outline of what you want the speech to look like. It's kind of an essay in a sense, right? So you want to have an introduction for the first part. Then you want to have, then for your second part, you want to have the body. Again, this is the chunk of the speech. Chunk of speech. And within the body, there's a specific tool that I teach my students that they can use to really organize the ideas that are in the chunk of their speech. And that's the CER tool, which is claim, evidence, reasoning. Again, so claim, evidence, reasoning is mostly for persuasive and argumentative speeches. In our next module, we're going to go more into the exact types of speeches that are out there and how to decide on which type of speech to use depending on which topic you are speaking about. But CER, claim, evidence, reasoning is mainly for persuasive and argumentative speeches. But I'm just going to leave it there. So I'll just write a little note up here, mainly for argumentative speeches. Right, so it's mainly for argumentative speeches, the CER method. And then obviously at the end, you don't want to just end on some random idea. You want to end on a very clear, concise, specific conclusion, right? So the conclusion, very important in a speech. Conclusions are usually not they are important, but they're not as important as essays, because essays are in writing, whereas speeches are just in talk, in verbal communication. Which is why the conclusion is so important, because it could leave a lasting impact on the audience. So in your conclusion, you want to reiterate body, ideas, and then leave audience with something to think about. Right, so that's the conclusion, really. So organization, once again, as I was saying, is just speech structure. There's three main parts to your speech structure, which is the introduction, the body, which is the chunk of the speech, or as I like to call it, the meat of the speech. And then finally, the third and final part of speech structure is conclusion, right? You want to reiterate your points, and you want to leave your audience with a lasting impact. You want to leave your audience with something to think about after the speech. As I was saying earlier, organization is a little bit more advanced. It's more of an advanced skill, so we're going to be going into it in our later module more in depth. But I just want to give you guys a sneak peek to it so you guys could start thinking about it right now and get prepared for that later module. Okay, so those are the 8 main skills that go into public speaking fundamentals, as I like to call it. You could call it whatever name you want: public speaking skills, public speaking attributes, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, yes, they're the public speaking fundamentals. Those are the 8 main ones. So before you take the quiz, next I want you to go over your notes, really in depth, study them. What exactly are the 8 different skills? And most importantly, since this is a public speaking class, of course, try and identify which of the 8 skills you struggle most with. And also try and identify which of the 8 skills you're the strongest at. Maybe you're the strongest at multiple of these skills. Maybe you're the weakest at multiple of these skills. But really, the road to improvement is identifying where your weaknesses and strengths lie. So before we move on to the next module, before we move on to the next lectures and the next assignments that I give you, I want you to really, once again, go over those notes and try to figure out where you're lacking and where you're strong. So, thank you for listening to my lecture, and good luck in the next quiz.